It's 3 in the morning. The phone rings twice and stops. Then play it again. You know what that means. There's a folder on your desk that shouldn't be there. Inside, there are numbers that don't add up, accounts that shouldn't be connected, and a name you recognize from a newspaper 6 years ago. You are an accountant. He works in a small, discreet office in the city center. Tomorrow, a man named Salvatore Conte will sit in front of you and ask you a question, and the answer you give will decide the rest of your life. Over the next 9 years, you will become one of the most influential people within one of the oldest Italian organized crime families. The problem is that, in this world, influence is never free. She always charges later. That's how it all began. If you enjoy stories about power, survival, and the behind-the-scenes worlds that few people know about, subscribe to the channel. Every week you will live a new life. You didn't choose this world. He knocked on her door. His accounting firm almost closed last year. 2 big clients left. Bills piled up. You started accepting any job that came your way. That's how Salvatore Conte came into the world. Gray suit, expensive watch, calculated smile. He didn't say Mafia. He said, financial consulting for private investors. You knew it was a lie. But the check he placed on the table would cover 6 months' rent for the office. You accepted your first job, organizing the books at a restaurant. He seemed innocent. Numbers adding up, invoices in order, everything within the law. But in the second week you noticed a pattern. Money is coming in at levels impossible for the restaurant's actual operations. You could have refused right there. He could have returned the money and pretended he'd never seen anything. But you had bills to pay, and a question was consuming you from the inside. How far will this scheme go? At the third meeting, Salvatore was direct. We need someone who understands numbers and knows how to keep quiet. He explained the basics. The family needed to move money without raising suspicion. Restaurants, laundromats, real estate agencies, businesses that generate excess cash, perfect for disguising illegal profits. He didn't ask you to steal. He asked you to organize it. That would give legal form to something that wasn't legal. You said yes before you even realized you had decided. As you were leaving that meeting, an older man with a heavy look in his eyes watched you from the street corner. You didn't know his name yet, but I was going to learn. He was the family consigliere, the advisor, the man who decided who deserved trust and who deserved to disappear. That night, lying in bed, you tried to convince yourself that it was just a temporary job, only until the account stabilized. You didn't tell your wife anything. He simply said that he had secured a new client, a discreet investor who preferred not to appear in public. She accepted the explanation without question. You hated yourself a little for it, and yet the next day you went back to the office on time. Salvatore revealed another detail of the agreement to you. You would never work alone. A second man, younger than Salvatore, would keep an eye on his every move. His name was Dino. Polite, smiling, always with a black notebook under his arm. You understood, the second time he showed up at your office unannounced, that the black notebook contained notes about you. Each entry time, every connection, every decision. You didn't know that, for this family, no one who learns their secrets simply leaves. The first month was training. You learned their language. Cleaning meant laundering money through legitimate business dealings. Layer meant concealing the origin of money in various transactions. Closing the circle meant making dirty money return as clean profit, with taxes paid, ready to be spent without suspicion. You were good at that, better than I imagined. His talent for numbers, which previously only served to balance spreadsheets for small businesses, now involved sums you had never seen before in your life, Salvatore realized. In the fourth week, he gave you a real test. To structure a property purchase that concealed 300,000 euros of dubious origin. You created 3 shell companies, each with a different purpose, each registered in the name of people who never knew they existed. The money passed through all 3, became real estate, financing, and came out the other side as a perfectly legal investment. Nobody suspected anything. Salvatore invited you to dinner that night, not at just any restaurant, but at the home of one of the family's capos, a man named Ettore. Ettore was fat, kind in appearance, and absolutely ruthless behind the eyes. He served you wine with his own hands. You have a gift, he said. Few people can make money disappear and reappear clean. That's worth more than a gun. You understood at that moment. what the real currency of this world was for someone like you. It wasn't fear. It wasn't violence. It was an influence. The more indispensable you became to their money, the more protected and more trapped you would be. That same night, Ettore handed you an envelope, 10,000 euros in cash as a bonus. You had never held so much money in your hand before. As you left his house, you noticed a detail that would haunt you for weeks. There was a hidden camera in the hallway pointed directly at the door you entered through. Someone, somewhere, was cataloging every face that passed by, and yours was already recorded. In the following weeks, his work rhythm changed completely. You stopped serving small clients. He stopped doing conventional accounting. Every hour of his day now belonged to Salvatore, to Ettore, and increasingly, indirectly, to Don Rocco. Dino kept showing up, always polite, always observing. One day he asked you a question that seemed harmless. Have you ever thought about buying a new apartment? A place more in line with your current value? You got the message. They wanted you to get used to money. They wanted their lifestyle to change, because a more expensive life is a life that is harder to give up. You bought the apartment 2 weeks later, a place overlooking the river, far above what an average accountant could afford. His wife was thrilled. You smiled at her, and inside you felt the first knot of guilt that wouldn't go away. 3 months later, the money that passed through his hands was no longer counted in thousands. It was counted in millions. You managed 6 shell companies, 3 offshore accounts, and a network of investors who were actually just names borrowed from relatives of family members. You had a new apartment, a new car, and that's a new problem. An auditor from the Guardia di Finanza, the Italian tax police, began asking questions about one of his shell companies. Nothing serious at first, just a request for documents. But his name started appearing again and again. Salvatore called you for an emergency meeting. He's asking too many questions, Salvatore said. We need to know how much he knows. You realized at that moment that your role had changed. You were no longer just the accountant. Now they expected you to solve the problem. You spent the night recreating records, adjusting dates, reinforcing the facade of one of the most exposed companies. It worked, for now, but the auditor did not give up. 2 weeks later, he showed up at his office in person, asking to see one of the company's books with his own hands. His heart raced. You smiled, offered coffee, and bought yourself enough time to send an urgent message to Salvatore. You didn't yet know that this decision, asking for help instead of trying to solve it alone, would cost you more than you imagined. That same night, Salvatore showed up at his apartment in person, something that had never happened before. He brought a bottle of wine and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You did well to warn us, he said, but now we need to understand one thing. What exactly does this man know about our companies? You realized, for the first time, that you were being interrogated, even though you were right next to them. Each answer would be used to decide the next step. You answered carefully, choosing each word, knowing that a mistake could put you in the same category as the auditor, someone who knew too much and represented a risk. When Salvatore left, he left a business card on the table with no name, just a phone number. If he contacts you again, call this number before answering any questions. You understood that, from that night on, you were no longer just a service provider. You had become part of your own family's surveillance system. At that moment, would you have left? Answer in the comments. The auditor disappeared from the case 3 days later. Nobody told you what happened to him. No one needed to say it. You only received one call from Salvatore. The problem has been solved. You don't need to know how. You spent the night sleepless, imagining scenarios you'd rather not imagine. The following morning, Ettore called you personally. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. In the room, besides Ettore, was the consigliere, the man with the heavy gaze you had seen on the first night. His name was Don Rocco. He was not the head of the family, but it was the man who decided who was trustworthy. We're going to test you, said Don Rocco. Not with numbers, with loyalty. He explained the task: to transfer a huge sum of money, almost 2 million euros, through a partner bank, without leaving any trace within 48 hours, while European authorities monitored suspicious movements of accounts linked to organized crime. If you succeeded, you would gain access to a level of operation that only a handful of people in the family knew about. If it failed, the money would be lost, and you would be held responsible. You spent 2 days without leaving the office. He created a cascading structure, moving money through 7 accounts in 4 different countries, disguising each transaction as payment for international consulting services. At the last minute, one of the banks blocked one of the transfers due to suspected money laundering. His plan nearly fell apart. You had to call a contact within the bank itself, an employee whom Ettore had already convinced years before, to manually authorize the transaction. There were 12 minutes left until the deadline. The transfer went through. You had succeeded. But when you turned off the computer, you noticed your hands were shaking, and it wasn't just tiredness. It was the first time you truly felt the weight of what you were doing. The next day, Don Rocco called you back, this time alone, without Ettore, without Salvatore, just the 2 of them, in a room with the curtains closed even during the day. He personally served you coffee, a gesture that you would later learn was reserved only for people he chose to truly trust. "Do you know why I tested you that way?" Don Rocco asked. You shook your head. Because anyone can handle money, but handling money under pressure, without breaking down, without panicking, that shows who can handle what comes next. You felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride, because he had passed the test of one of the most powerful and dangerous men he had ever met. Fear, because what comes next sounded like a promise, not a compliment. Don Rocco handed you a card with an address. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock in the morning. Wear a better suit than that. You didn't know exactly what awaited you there. All she knew was that her life had just changed to a new level. The news spread quickly within the organization. The young accountant had done what few could. Move money under surveillance, without leaving a trace, under extreme pressure. Don Rocco called you again. This time not to test you, but to reward you. You were promoted to what the family informally called a banker. This meant that you were no longer just taking care of a facade family. You became responsible for managing the financial flow of the entire organization across a whole region of northern Italy. This meant direct meetings with Don Rocco. It meant knowing names that the press only mentioned in court cases. It meant having, for the first time, the power to decide in which businesses the family's money would be invested. You recommended entering a new sector, solar energy, through poorly monitored government subsidies. It worked better than anyone expected. Millions of euros in clean money, generated through legitimate contracts with the Italian government itself. Don Rocco was impressed. You don't launder money, he said. You build empires. You felt for the first time something dangerous. Pride. His name, once known only to an unknown accountant, was now whispered with respect within the innermost circles of the family. You had real influence. People would ask for his opinion before closing deals. Bosses treated you as an equal, not as an employee. But along with respect came something more. You started getting invited to meetings that discussed much more than just money. Meetings about territory, regarding rivals, regarding punishments. At the address Don Rocco had given you, you found an entire office that wasn't listed in any public records. 3 floors, cameras in every hallway, and a room at the top reserved exclusively for financial meetings of the family's top officials. It was there that you first met the real boss, Don Alfredo Ricci, the patriarch who rarely appeared in public and who controlled, through intermediaries like Don Rocco, a network that spanned 4 countries. Don Alfredo didn't talk much during that first meeting. He just watched you silently throughout the entire meeting while Don Rocco presented the figures for the new solar energy project. Finally, he asked a single direct question. "Are you afraid of me?" You hesitated for a second, long enough for him to notice. "Yes," you replied. He smiled, for the first and only time during that encounter. "Good. That means you're smart." You left that room understanding that you had just been accepted into a circle that very few people, inside or outside the family, ever reached. You didn't know it yet, but the worst was yet to come. His personal life began to crumble, at the same rate as his life within his family grew. His wife noticed the absences. He noticed the money, which had no explanation. He noticed the fear in her eyes every time the phone rang late at night. You lied. Again and again. Eventually, she stopped asking. Not because she believed the lies, but because she stopped wanting to know the answer. Your best friend, a former partner at the accounting firm, noticed something was wrong when you refused, for the 3rd time in a row, to review an old client's accounts due to lack of time. He confronted you. He asked directly if you were involved with dangerous people. You denied it. He didn't believe it. 2 weeks later, he stopped responding to her messages. You found out through third parties that he had moved to another city without telling anyone. You never knew if it was fear of him or if someone in the family talked to him to ensure his silence. At the same time, within the organization, his rise created enemies. One of the oldest bosses, named Bruno, viewed with suspicion the speed with which an outside accountant had gained so much financial power. Bruno began to spread doubts about his loyalty. He hinted in private meetings that perhaps you were keeping information to yourself or worse, secretly cooperating with authorities. Don Rocco didn't confront you directly, but he began to test his answers more carefully. He began asking for more detailed explanations about each transaction. You understood the message without anyone needing to say it aloud. Influence in this world is never permanent. She needs to be defended every day, and defending it meant distancing yourself further and further from everything you were before entering this world. One night, you received an unexpected visitor. Dino, the man with the black notebook, showed up at your new apartment unannounced. He didn't come to threaten. He came to warn us. Bruno has already asked twice about a meeting you had alone with Don. Alfredo, Dino said quietly. That's not normal. He's trying to find something against you. You asked what you should do. Dino shrugged. Continue being indispensable. As long as the money that passes through your hands is greater than the problem you represent, you are safe. It was the first time someone had stated aloud, bluntly, the true rule of that world. Their safety came neither from loyalty nor from friendship. It came down to how much you were worth compared to the risk you represented. You understood that you needed to become even more valuable, even if it meant distancing yourself even further from who you were before. If you've made it this far, leave a like. Most people wouldn't survive that situation. Bruno's accusation reached a critical point when one of his transactions was questioned by European authorities, not due to any error on his part, but due to a failure on the part of one of the partner banks that he did not control. Bruno used this to put pressure on Don Rocco. Either he proves complete loyalty, or he's a risk we need to eliminate. You were called to a meeting that you knew, deep down, would be crucial. Don Rocco put a proposal on the table that had nothing to do with numbers. One of the men who worked under Bruno's supervision had been identified as a police informant. They didn't ask you to kill him. That wasn't his job. They asked for something worse, in their own way, that you use your financial access to completely freeze the man's accounts, cutting off any resources he could use to flee or protect himself, ensuring he would be defenseless the moment the family decided to act. You understood exactly what was being asked. You wouldn't pull the trigger, but his signature, his numbers, his financial influence, would be a direct part of what would happen next. That was your last real chance to refuse, to say that it went beyond what you had agreed to do. But refusing, at that moment, after everything you already knew, after everything your family already knew that you knew, was no longer a safe option. To refuse meant to become, yourself, a risk to be eliminated. You executed the order. The accounts were frozen in less than an hour. 3 days later, you learned, through a casual comment from Ettore, that the man had been found by the police, not alive. You never asked for the details, not because I didn't want to know, but because, for the first time, he realized he no longer wanted to confirm just how far you had already gone. In the following days, you noticed a subtle change in the way people treated you. Ettore, who had always been warm and welcoming, began to keep his distance. Salvatore avoided looking directly into her eyes during meetings. Even Dino, who always warned you about things in advance, stopped showing up uninvited. You understood. You hadn't become more respected. He had become more feared. And in that world, being feared meant that no one else trusted you enough to be honest with you. Interestingly, Bruno was the only one who kept looking for you, not as an enemy, but almost as if he were seeking an inconvenient ally. Now you understand how this works, he said, in one of the rare moments when the two of you were alone. The higher you climb, the fewer people there are around you. At the top, you'll be alone with Don Alfredo and Don Rocco. Nobody else. You didn't answer. But deep down, I knew he was right. You've just crossed a line of no return. Today, 7 years after that first phone call at 3 a.m, you are one of the most influential men in the family's financial structure. You manage investments that exceed hundreds of millions of euros. Local governments unknowingly depend on money that passes through their hands. International banks treat their shell companies as reputable clients. You have everything that once seemed impossible: money, respect, decision-making power. But you can't leave home without telling someone. You cannot travel without Don Rocco's permission. You can't close a bank account, move to another city, or simply disappear because you know too much. You know names. He knows money trails. He knows secrets worth more than his own life, and that's precisely why he'll never be free again. His wife left 2 years ago, taking their children to another country, far from questions she never wanted to ask again. Your old friend never contacted you again. Bruno, your old rival, was found dead in circumstances that no one openly discusses. And you know, deep down, that your financial influence helped determine that outcome. Even without a direct order, you have everything that money can buy, except for the one thing that truly mattered: the freedom to say no. Your life has become a cage built from the very numbers you once mastered. A golden cage, yes, but still, a cage. Sometimes at night, you look out the window of the apartment that once seemed like a dream, and you think about the man you were before that. First phone call at 3 in the morning. An ordinary accountant with overdue bills, but with the freedom to simply leave if he wanted to. You traded that freedom for impossible numbers, for respect that was actually fear, for an influence so great that it became your own prison. Don Rocco still calls you the most valuable man in the family. You already understand that this is not a compliment. It's a sentence. At what point do you think you crossed the point of no return? Answer in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe. And if you want to live another life inside one of the most dangerous worlds ever created, click on the video that's appearing on the screen right now. The next story is even more intense.